Can you imagine how exciting it would have been to be back in the day, sitting around this phone as they made the first phone call ever using electric wire signaling and things like that? I saw this picture and I just started thinking about, what if I was that guy right there watching it, or what if I was this guy sitting at the phone, first hearing the phone conversation going, this is the most amazing thing ever. And then as I looked at this picture, I started thinking about, what about like 40 or 50 years from now when people are looking at pictures of you and I, sitting around a Cisco router, and they're like, imagine, configuring something with typing, what's going to be there? Who knows? Who knows what people will be looking at? Or they'll be looking at a picture of us going, they actually used pictures back then. They didn't have holographic, who knows? Anyhow, we need to take a step back into history and look at the historic voice world. Now, before we get into this next, I guess you could call it subsection of the Ccna Voice series, let me talk about why. Why are we going here? The reason why is because the historic voice world will be around for many years to come. As much as I like to get on my voice over IP wagon and, talk about the world going to voice over IP, the truth be told, there's still millions of people out there using rotary phones, which, we've had pulse dialing for over 40 years. So it tells you that the rest of the world may not move as fast as you may want it to sometimes. So the idea behind understanding historic voice is knowing how to integrate the historic voice world with our voice over IP realm. In order to do that, we have to have at least a base understanding. We're not going to get into, Alexander Graham Bell and his theories or anything like that. We're going to do more of understanding the base theory behind, how does analog voice work, and what does it take to get that over to the voice over IP world. So we'll start off in the historical voice by talking about analog connections and what it means to have an analog connections, how those signal. We'll then move into electronic waveforms and electric waveforms, and I put more than you ever knew, more than I ever knew. When I first got into analog voice, I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And it took me a little bit to go, oh, okay, this is actually interesting, and get back into the mindset of the historic realm, but it really is cool when you understand it. From there, we get into understanding analog signaling itself, and that'll dive more into exactly what we need to configure our Cisco routers to interface with that environment. As I began studying the world of analog connectivity and the history of voice and things of that nature, I really learned the late 1800s and the early 1900s, man, what a time to live in. That was just the time where just the inventions and new technology was coming out like mad. If you were to look at historically inventions, you have zero back here of time. You got BC and AD, and as time was going, you got inventions like a spear, just very basic things. And somewhere around the late 1800s, it's just like wham, we hit this wall of technology where everybody's like a new invention daily was coming out. And Thomas Edison, in around 1877, invented this thing known as the phonograph. And I'm sure if you've been in the technology world for a while, you know a little bit about the phonograph. It was a device that allowed you to store signals by using this cylinder covered in tinfoil. And it was actually a rotating cylinder, and this needle would go around just denting in little things as you recorded on there. And the cylinder could only be used once because it would make these little dents. And as you played it back, the needle would go over these bumps in the tinfoil and would regenerate or reform the voice that was used when you recorded it. That is a sample of analog transmission. Now, a very generic base definition of analog transmission is something that uses the property of the transmission media to convey a signal. Thomas Edison, when he created that phonograph in 1877, decided that making dents in the tinfoil, that's the property of that media, meaning the dents in the tinfoil were what stored and relayed the signaling that comprised voice. Now, as technology progressed, that eventually transformed into a record, to where you would actually use magnetic fields on that record, and the signal, kind of like a waveform signal on that record, as it traveled around, and the needle would read that waveform and play music and sound. Record players would do that. Braille, if you think about that, Braille for the blind, in a way, is a type of analog transmission because you make dents in paper, and people that are blind move their finger over those dents, and that conveys information. So when you think about analog transmission, there's so many examples of that you could get into. Mechanically, electrically, there's many different ways to store information that something will move over that and read that information. That's all analog transmission. Now, it just so happens that when we talk about our home telephone lines and receiving voice over the telephone, or good grief, when I'm talking to you right now, you're hearing my voice, we have ways of storing information that is transmitted, and we use the properties of that medium to transmit that. Now, if you're using properties of something for transmission, that is an analog signal. Now, let me jump a little bit ahead because I started brainstorming. I thought, I'm talking to you right now. Well, right now I'm talking to you over a digital communication, which is actually much cleaner than an analog signal. In the digital world, we don't really use properties of the media. We use ones and zeros. It's kind of weird to think about it, but right now, the words that are coming out of my mouth are being transformed into ones and zeros, which could be transmitted over anything. That's why it's considered digital. It's not really using the properties of Ethernet to send stuff to you, or anything like that. Oh man, I can't tell you. I have to take a moment to pause. I have a little 16-month-old daughter, and she just came in and into my office and just gave me the biggest grin in the world. I'll tell you what, there is nothing more rewarding than just grin. What an analog transmission. See how I just tie that right back in? An analog transmission using the properties of her face to convey happiness and just smile at you. That's what analog lines do for our voice. When we talk into our telephone using analog communication, it's using the properties of electricity for voice transmission. Now, this is where we could either dive in fully into the properties of electricity or just keep it simple. And for this discussion, I would choose to keep it simple. We don't really need to fully understand all the properties of electricity to understand analog voice going over the lines, although you can dig deep if you want to. I would actually recommend, I'm always about simple explanations and just understanding the foundation properties. There's a website that I love just because it's something that can keep you interested all the time. HowStuffWorks.com. Now, be warned before you go there that they are free but funded fully on advertising. So you're going to get, pages just full of flash advertising and all that kind of stuff. But they've got some great explanations. And if you ever go to howstuffworks.com and type in how does electricity work, just a great simple explanation of voltage and wattage and how the current comes in, and just excellent explanation. So if you want to dig deeper in how electricity works, I'd highly recommend that. But for this discussion, I'll just say that electricity has all kinds of properties, such as the voltage and the amperage and all kinds of frequencies that go into electricity and sending it over a wire. Well, when you are speaking into a phone, it is the job of that phone to convey the words that come out of your mouth in such a way that it can be represented by electricity. So when you're talking to somebody over the phone, you are speaking into a handset. It is converting that into a waveform that looks something like this. You see all these little waves going across. Matter of fact, where's my pen? I drew down here, or snapshotted, SoundForge. There's actually a program out there called Sony SoundForge where you can record voice and things like that. And I just opened that program on my computer and said the word hello. And then I just screenshotted what, if that's a verb, screenshotted. I took a screenshot of the waveform that was created when I said hello. What Sony SoundForge did was take that analog waveform and say, I'm going to represent that word that came out of your mouth with all these different frequencies and voltage levels over time. So as I said the word, hello, I totally missed that up right there, but it kind of matches those words and that symbols into an electric form. Now that electric form can transmit any length of distance over wire and be received at the other side, where it then takes that electricity and plays back sound represented by it. So all these properties of electricity are used to convey the properties of your voice as you speak into an analog handset. That is how we have communicated for decades. And since you saw that first phone call picture, that's how they communicated back then, and for decades that's how we communicated from our home phone lines to each other. Let's dig a little bit deeper into that electric signaling in the phones. Anytime you have anything electrical, you have to think about electricity flowing through that device. For example, if I had a flashlight right here, let's say I had a little, well, I'll keep it simple, a little light bulb right here that I wanted to power. And I wanted to use a battery to do that. What I would need is a negative end of that battery and a positive end of that battery, kind of like this battery sitting up here. And I would connect a wire from the negative end of that battery into the light bulb, and if you dig deeper into electricity, that light bulb is known as the load, meaning that is going to be the device sucking energy out of that device, or out of that power source, the battery. And then I would connect a wire from that light bulb to the positive side. Now, with the nature of electricity, you have all these atoms that are desiring to balance themselves out. And we have all of these negatively charged atoms, and anytime you have just a battery sitting there, like you've got it sitting there just on the counter, all those negative charged atoms are just going, I can't go anywhere. Some of them are jumping out of that battery over time into the air and things like that. And that's why you have expiration dates on batteries, is because slowly over time that those atoms, negatively charged atoms, just kind of leak out and attach to positive molecules and so on. But they definitely can't get out like they want to. So when you connect that wire right there and plug it into, it ends up connecting to the positive side, all of those atoms are like, we can get out, and they hit this light, and this light has a load inside of that where the atoms come out and energy is expended in some way. That's where our light bulb lights up, and then some of them end up reaching over here to the positive side of the battery, much less than the originally negative charged atom, because many of them ended up being expended through the light bulb. So when we have a phone line coming into our house, the phone line is always considered a pair of wires. You always see a wire pair coming in. And when you talk to a phone technician, they'll always say, that's the tip and ring wire. That's just common language for a kind of negative or ground terminal and a positive or current detection terminal. The ring side of that will typically be connected to the battery. And when your telephone handset is on hook, those wires coming into your house are disconnected. So you have that. This is our central office. The public switch telephone network is connected into our house. Here's our home. Comes in from the street into this wall jack, and we have that pair of wires coming in that plugs into one or more of the phones in our house. But if they're all on hook, that line is broken. So you have this electric charge, or the battery over here, that's just like this light bulb. If there's no light bulb there, it's just going, I can't move anywhere. So as soon as you pick your handset off the hook, that literally drops down and connects both of those wires. So we now have a path, and all these little electrical atoms go, we have a path to go and travel through that phone handset through to the other side. At the central office, it goes, somebody has lifted a handset, thus connecting the circuit, so I will now send dial tone down that line. That whole process is a signaling method known as loop start. When the receiver is lifted off hook, off of the telephone, the loop is connected between those wires, and signaling, or electric signal, passes down the circuit. Now, loop start signaling works pretty well for home phones. And the reason it works well is because it's just a single line. When I pick up the phone to make a call, I'm going to signal to the other side. It's not a high volume line, meaning there's not tons of calls coming in and out and all that kind of thing. So our home phone lines work as we're accustomed to. Now, when we get to larger environments, they found that there was a problem with the loop start process, and that's because we have higher call volumes. Take this example. We've got a PBX system inside of a phone, inside of a company. Let me just, here's my company that has 100 employees inside of there. A PBX system just allows them to run their own internal phone system inside of there. Now, if we are using analog signaling for the outside world, we might have a bunch of phone lines that are coming in from the central office, because more than one person in the company might be talking out to the public switch telephone world at a time. Now, if we had the loop start signaling method on all of these lines, here's line number 1, 2, and 3 coming in from the central office, then we always have people that are picking up the phone, making outgoing calls, or picking up the phone to answer one of the incoming calls coming in from the public switch telephone network. With the loop start system, it would lead to a problem known, you'll want to know this term, known as glare. Evil glare. What glare is, what they consider glare, is when you pick up the phone, it signals to the PBX system that you want to grab one of these outside lines to make a call to the central office. Well, remember, this PBX is handling a high volume of calls, going out from the internal network and coming in. So there's always calls coming in, there's always calls going out from the internal network all the time. So somebody picks up the line at the exact same time that a call happened to be coming in from the central office. Well, when you pick up the phone, the PBX says, let me seize one of those outside lines, and at the same time, a call was coming in saying, I need, to make one of those phone rings, and you picked them up at the exact same time, poof, those calls are bridged. So the person picks up the phone before it rings. The caller coming in never really heard a ring signal. It's just pick. And this person's thinking I'm picking up to dial an outgoing call. Is this making sense? They're picking up to say, I need to make an outgoing call, and they're accidentally connected to somebody that was coming in at the same time. You may have experienced glare at your home. If you make some calls at home, you might pick up the phone at your home, and you go to dial, and you go, oh, there's no dial tone. So our natural instinct is go, hello? And somebody's there on the phone. They go, oh, hello? Who's? And there's that kind of moment of confusion, and you go, oh, hi, Bob. And it's always ironic. I was just getting ready to call you, and it always happens to be the person you're going to call at home. But in a PBX environment, glare is evil, because maybe the person coming from the central office or coming from the PSTN was trying to dial this happy guy down here, but ended up getting connected to this happy guy up here. So they're going, oh, so I wasn't calling for you. Who are you? It's kind of that weird, why don't you call back? And so glare became a very serious problem in the PBX realm. So what they created to solve glare, or to help with glare, is a signaling method known as ground start. What that does is when somebody picks up the line, it doesn't automatically connect the circuit. It actually shoots a grounding, like you have that tip and ring wire. Tip and ring. It actually shoots a ground signal down, it's actually usually down the ring, which grounds out the line temporarily and says, hey, I need an active line. So it doesn't automatically connect the other side. It actually sends a signal saying, give me dial tone. And the other side receives that and goes, okay, here's a new line for you, rather than automatically connecting you to an incoming ringing line. This method of signaling was actually used in phone booths for quite some time. Some of you might remember the movie War Games. If to be a nerd, you have to obviously own the movie War Games, where Matthew Broderick was connecting to. Man, it's been a while since I've seen that movie. Where he was, what was the big computer system? Whopper. That was the big computer system that he was trying to hack into in NASA and all that kind of thing. There's a scene in that movie where he's driving out on a desert road and gets to a phone booth to make a call, but doesn't have a dime or nickel or whatever it costs to make a call back then. So he actually unscrews the receiver of the phone and touches one of the wires from the receiver to the metal phone booth, and it goes clink and grounds out the line, which gives him a dial tone, and he's able to make a call. That's because a lot of these phone booths originally used ground start, where when you dropped a coin into the phone booth, whether it be a quarter or a dime or whatever, it would brush by the tip and ring, here's your coin, falling by there, it would brush by both the tip and ring wires and would ground them out temporarily, which was then how the phone booth would know to give you a dial tone. In the old phone booths, when you picked up the line, it wasn't like today where we got dial tone and you could make a call and then deposit your coin. You actually had to deposit the coin first, which would ground out those lines. So it would be a more explicit signal to seize a line rather than just automatically connecting you just by lifting the handset. So in today's world, the loop start signaling is used to signal for home phones, where there's very little chance of glare, meaning a call comes in at the exact same time, unless you're just always making calls and always receiving calls from your home phone line. Ground start signaling is usually used for businesses and PBX systems, to where you have to have an explicit signal to seize the line rather than just automatically connecting it by lifting the handset of your phone. Now, when we look at analog signaling, there's also other signal types that we need to communicate to convey different messages across the line. There's three main categories of signaling that we're concerned with, and they are, you can see the first one on the top right here, supervisory signaling, informational signaling, and address signaling, when we're dialing digits back and forth and that kind of thing. Again, we think back, we have to think of ways to electrically send signals that convey some kind of communication over a wire. So supervisory signaling focuses on ways to send on-hook, off-hook, and ringing signals over an analog or electrical line that's coming into our house. Now we've talked about on-hook and off-hook signaling, supervisory signaling. That could be, if we're using loop start phones, on-hook signaling means lifting the handset, and by completing the circuit, we signal to the telephone company that we would like to make a call. That is an off-hook signal. Hanging up the phone sends an on-hook signal, which disconnects the electrical circuit, and that says, phone company, we are done making our call. You can disconnect the line. Those are terms that are used to describe supervisory signaling. Now, this is a paradox. What about ringing? I mean, think about that phone again. You've got wires coming in from the phone company that are, coming in to be looped, but they're disconnected. And the last picture I showed you showed both of them disconnected, but there's actually only one that's severed from the actual phone when you have the phone on hook. When the phone company would like to send you a ringing signal, what they do is use AC current rather than DC. What that means is you've got your phone company connecting these wires. DC current is the one that has to travel through the phone to be received back by the telephone company. Inside of your phone is an AC transistor, or an AC receiving chip, if you will, inside of that phone, or receiving device. So when the phone company needs to ring your phone, they'll actually send live current down the wire, not stuff that has to be looped back, but something that transistor can receive, and that signals the phone. Older phones actually had, a bell and actually a little, hammer that when it got that electric signal, it would be enough to make that hammer go cha-ching, cha-ching. And that's why on older phones you get that classic ding, 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 ring. I have one of those old phones. It's awesome. I love hearing that sound. My what is this? My iPhone has that ring tone where it actually sounds like an old ring phone. It's just classic. Newer phones have a receiver that when they get that electric signal, they electronically ring, and that's how you get all the fancy ringtones that we have nowadays on our home analog phones. So you'll know if you've ever been working on a phone wire, if you've wired your own home for phone lines, there's two wires coming in. If you're gripping that wire when it rings, oh, it rings. It's one of those shocking experiences. You go, the phone's ringing, because it's AC current being sent down that wire, and that is a type of supervisor ringing signal. In addition to supervisory signaling, we have informational signaling over these lines. Now, information is a way of conveying some kind of information to you while you are on the phone. For example, we pick up the receiver of our phone. Here's our phone. We just went off hook and completed the circuit that signals to the phone company that there is an active line ready to make the call. Now, the end result that we feel when we lift the line is that we hear dial tone. Now, the dial tone isn't the result of completing that circuit and allowing electricity. I guess you could argue it is, but the dial tone is not generated by you completing that circuit. All that does is allow electricity to flow through your phone and flow through the receiver of your phone. The dial tone is generated from the phone company sending a specific frequency. Take that picture. A specific frequency of electricity down the line that generates the tone you're so used to hearing every single time you pick up the phone. Now, this is just a frequency. They could change that frequency to anything they want. You ever seen that movie Dumb and Dumber with Jim Carrey and I don't know who the other guy is. His name is Lloyd in the movie, Harry and Lloyd. And there's a point in the movie where they're driving along in this big shag dog looking van, and Jim Carrey looks over at the other guy and says, "Do you want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?" And the guy goes, "No, not really." He goes, and it just makes this, extremely annoying sound, and the guy's like, stop it, stop. It's a funny part of the movie. The phone company could very well generate the most annoying sound in the world for your dial tone, because all it is a frequency of electricity that's coming in. So if they wanted to, one day when you picked up your phone, you could just hear this, this extremely annoying sound for dial tone, because it's just a frequency of electricity. All of these things, like a busy signal or ringback, meaning you dial somebody and you hear the brrrr, the ring, like the other side of the phone is ringing, or congestion, like the like the long distance carrier has experienced some kind of congestion. All of these different tones are just frequencies of electricity that differ based on where you are in the world. That's why when you are in Europe, the phones sound different when you lift them off the hook, is because they decided that dial tone will use a slightly different frequency than we do here, or I do here, in the United States of America. They all have their own electric frequencies that are used to signal some kind of information over an analog line. Again, the point I want to convey when I talk about this signaling is that these are electric signals that are being sent. Now, that'll be important when we talk about digital signal, which doesn't use electricity. Digital signal, as I mentioned, is ones and zeros, so we're going to have to think about, well, how do we play a dial tone with ones and zeros? The last kind of signaling that we need to prepare ourselves for in the voice realm is address signaling. This is a way of signaling digits that you are dialing over an analog line. Now, one of the initial forms of address signaling was pulse. And what this would do is literally break and reconnect the electrical circuit between the phone and the telephone company in a certain rhythmic rhythm. I believe the connection was something like 30% broken, 70% connected. So as you take this rotary phone and twist these digits around, like if I dialed it 0, it would say, okay, 30% break, 70% connected. 30% break, 70% connected. It would literally break and connect that tip and ring wire inside of there on a certain rhythmic level. Now, if you were good enough, you could actually dial by picking up the handset and tapping. When you lift this up, you've got your little prongs right here that tell if the phone is on hook or off hook. You might have tried this before. By tapping those little prongs, you could go tap 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 tap, and kind of signaling dial digits, and it would work if you're good enough, and you can get about this 30% broken, 70% connected method of signaling on there. Or you could tap the handset on the desk and kind of get the same kind of pulse signaling that you were doing by doing this. So that was one of the initial forms that were out there, and still, this is a consideration. Around the world, not everybody supports what's known as DTMF dialing. There are some phone companies that still only allow pulse dialing, and you'll see when we configure our Cisco routers for voice over IP, Cisco routers have the capability of signaling using pulse. I don't know if you have seen one of these phones recently, but my grandparents have one. They have a cabin up in Michigan, and every time I go up there and dial, initially it's annoying because we're so used to the speed of microwave kind of signaling, but I don't know what it is. These are very calming phones to me. If I ever am in an argument with my wife or something, I just need a good pulse phone to pull out and just be like, give me a couple zeros, darling, and I'll calm back down. It's very calming to be able to dial that way. The newer form of dialing is dual tone multi-frequency, or DTMF. These digits on a telephone keypad are actually assigned certain electric frequencies. Dual double of them. And if you've ever, dialed "Mary Had a Little Lamb" on these telephone keypads, you dial, "Mary had," or 3 2 1 2 3 1, or something like that, and you'll tell it's kind of like it is a multi-free. It's like a harmony. If you listen to these tones, where it's actually playing two sounds at once. And that's how the telephone company is able to tell if you're dialing a 2, a 3, a 4. You'll be able to tell different signals between them. Now, some of them are not a big enough gap. Like, it's difficult to tell if you're dialing from the human ear a 1, 4, or a 7, because they're very close together on this spectrum. But the phone company can tell enough of a difference. I got this little chart from Wikipedia, the greatest source of all kinds of information on the internet. So you're almost composing a symphony every single time that you dial on one of these telephone keypads. By combining electric frequencies, we tell the phone company what numbers we're dialing. That is the realm of analog connectivity. And that gives you a little history of how analog connections came to be, with ways of conveying voice or information over some type of media, using the properties of the media, like dense and tinfoil, or frequencies of electricity, or braille symboling on a piece of paper. All of those are styles of analog communication. We use electric waveforms to convey voice, which the great thing about it is it has enough levels and enough of variations in electricity to convey a very accurate form of our voice over the wire. And it's kind of weird to think about it this way, but when you're talking using a telephone to the other side isn't actually hearing your voice. They're hearing electric signals that play out like your voice. So, and I know that's almost semantics, but when you're talking to somebody in person, they're not hearing your voice either. I guess we could kind of dig ourselves in a hole in this one, but they're not hearing your voice when you're talking to them face to face. They're hearing variations in air pressure, which is what composes what your voice actually sounds like. If there was no air pressure variations, you can't actually hear somebody's voice as they try to communicate. So all of these things are analog connectivity in different ways that we can signal our voice across the wire. Now, signaling is that final concept we talked about. Now, the reason that's important, and address informational and supervisory signaling is important, is not just for mere kind of who wants to be a millionaire facts, but because as we move into the voice over IP and digital forms of communication, it's coming up next, we have to be able to replicate or regenerate those signals in ones and zeros sort of format in our digital realm. So we have to always have that in the back of our mind when we're configuring and setting up digital connections. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.